So, pasture improvement, how do you know it will pay? What's wrong with that pasture? Very short. Got Holsteins in it. Yeah, that. Now a little bit later on, you might want to bite your tongue on that one. Yeah. We see things like that. What's really wrong with it?
Water. Missing water.
Missing something else that starts with an M. Management. Yeah, that's what's missing from that pasture is management. What's wrong with this pasture? Yeah, now everybody's going to know to say management. Well, there's a lot of, there's grass out there, but there's a lot of bare ground out there. We've got probably a dysfunctional water cycle out here. Too much bare ground, not enough litter. And how did that come to be? Management. That isn't alfalfa. I believe that's silverleaf cinquefoil. And it looks like that is almost the entire composition of that pasture. Is that a good solar panel? No, that's not capturing solar energy and making cow feed. Do you think we have a healthy water cycle there? No, absolutely not. It's, what's wrong with this pasture? Management. It's a lack of management. What's wrong with this pasture? Not too much. Sometimes people say, it's not on my place. Is what's wrong with it. So management is always going to give you, no, you are always going to get what you manage for it. That's what I'm trying to say. And I want to emphasize at this point that the lack of a decision, failure to make a choice, is management. It's management by default. It's going back to what I talked about this morning of letting cows make business decisions. That's not their job. That's your job, is to make the business decisions. So, if you've been managing a pasture for 5 years or more, and they look like any of those first three, the first thing that you need to do is know why it is that way. How did that pasture get to be that way? It is the product of your management. And you can say, well, I had a drought. Well, guess what? You could have destocked sooner by being more aware of what was going on climatically around you. You might say, well, I had a flood. You know what? Floods are a whole lot harder to deal with than what droughts are. Because floods, if the water comes out and stands there for too long, will flat out kill everything that's there. Droughts rarely actually do that. So when we think about pasture improvement, some of the things that might come to mind are, well, I might have to fertilize some. You might have to seed something. Maybe that's a complete reseeding of the pasture. I'm just saying that. You might need to build some more fence. You might need to develop additional stock water points. All of these things cost money. There's actually no getting around those things that I listed. Some of these have greater opportunity for paying you back than others do. Some of these things will only work well in conjunction of doing 2 or 3 of these other things. And so when I think about what we have to work with out there, the existing current pasture situation, my first step to try to change that is stock water development and fence. Because the problem with those first 3 pastures that we saw were all the product of the pasture being exposed to grazing livestock for too long of a period of time. Every problem that we saw starting out in those pastures was a failure to manage time. And it takes the ability to subdivide pastures, to move animals around, to be able to get in control of that time factor. So I almost always start with stock water and fence. A lot of times I go to somebody's place and they say, well, you think I ought to reseed this pasture? And that's where a lot of people want to start. Because they know if you tear it up and plant something and it rains, suddenly you have beautiful pasture. But if the management is not changed to where you take control of time, you take control of the business decisions, rather than letting the cows do it, 5 years from now, and maybe it's 7 years, maybe it's 3 years, but somewhere down the road, you're going to be back in exactly the same situation where you are today. So it doesn't pay to reseed a pasture if you don't put proper management on it. And fertility, if you don't effectively manage the forage that's out there, putting fertilizer on a pasture is largely just throwing money away, because you don't reap the benefit from it if you aren't effectively managing other aspects of that pasture. So everything that we're rolling together is what I call management-intensive grazing. It isn't the grazing that we're intensifying on the land, it's the management that we're applying to our pasture and livestock situation. So if we look at what MIG is supposed to do for you, we expect to get increased pasture productivity, improved animal performance, reduced wintering costs, less fertilizer use, eliminate clipping and mowing, and, as it says, many, many other wonderful things. We can get into parasite management, and many other wonderful things. So this is what we're trying to accomplish. The fence is not the objective. The stock water is not the objective. Reseeding the pasture is not the objective. These are the things that are the objective, because this is what's going to directly affect your bottom line. If suddenly, through a change in management, you were able to produce 50% more forage on your ranch in a year, are you in a position where you can actually capture that added production? Because it's either going to take more animals to harvest that, or you might be mechanically inclined to mechanically harvest it as hay or something. You know, those are things that you could do with that extra forage. Do you have the money to buy more cows? Do you have the contacts to start a custom grazing business so that you don't have to buy those additional animals, but you get someone to put animals on your place to harvest that? If you make it into hay, are you going to feed all that hay on your place, or are you going to sell it off your place? If you're going to sell it off your place, what are you going to do about that $80 to $85 worth of NPK and micro minerals that are leaving in every ton of hay you sell off your place? Have you made provisions to replace those nutrients in the soil? If not, selling hay is a terrible mining operation on your place that will deplete your soil over time. So you might have to change other aspects of your management to capture that benefit of increased productivity. Alright, so different practices, some of them have an ongoing benefit, some of them have a limited lifetime. If you reseed a pasture, don't change the grazing management, and 5 to 7 years down the road you're back in the same place. Well, that pasture improvement practice had a limited duration of effect. Usually we see an increase in productivity and then a fall off. On the other hand, something like an investment in stock, water, and fence gives you tools that are going to, with each passing year, hopefully you learn more how to more and more effectively use those tools, so that 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from there, you're still deriving a benefit from them. Will that be an increasing level of benefit over that course of time? I don't know. It depends. It depends on a number of things. But generally, it is going to be a sustained benefit over a more extended period of time. One of the things we have to do, we're going to talk about cost-benefit analysis here. So if we're going to do a cost-benefit analysis on any kind of pasture improvement practice, we need to somehow be able to figure out what's the benefit going to be. What is this doing for us? If you have developed a grazing cell or done a reseeding or something on a similar piece of property and you've done it yourself, and if you've kept records, you should have a real good idea of what that level of benefit is going to be. Maybe this is the first time you're going to try to do something. Is there someone in your neighborhood who has implemented this different type of management? If so, what was their experience? Don't be afraid to talk to people, but some of the questions you have to consider: is it actually the same quality of land? Did that person change other parts of their management that you may or may not be willing to change? And then we have the famous WAG too. It's always easy to just write some number down there, but really we want to base it on either our own experience or the experience of other grazers that we know and trust. But we need to somehow be able to project out a benefit. And so, once again, for you spreadsheet geeks out there, if you want to get a copy of the cost benefit analyzer, you can email me and send it to you. Or better yet, where's Kathy? She went away. She's tired of hearing me, I guess. This might be another thing that actually we could put up at the WBDC website and have it available for people who attended, who are members, to download it. So there's some discussion here, some of the things I've talked about. But what we do with the cost benefit analyzer, one of the first steps is set up a response stream. What do we think is going to happen if we change this management? Now this one is for fence and water, and what I'm saying is, okay, the first year that you have put this in place and you start rotating the cattle more effectively, I'm projecting a 20% increase in carrying capacity. Year 2, 30%, year 3, 40%, year 4, 45, and 50. Now, I'm going to talk about long-term profitability and cash flow feasibility here in a little bit, but on these capital improvements, basically, I want them paid off within 5 years. If they stretch out longer than that, then you really have to ask yourself, well, how am I actually paying for this? So I'm generally looking at about a 5-year payout on things like this. So from some base level of productivity where we are right now, that's what these projections are doing. And so with the 20% increase, it's saying I'm getting 32 additional animal unit days per year. So from that I know that the base level of production was actually 160. The second year I expect to get 48, 64, so on and so forth. So over the 5-year duration, I expect to add almost 300 animal unit days per acre harvested off of that land. Every pasture improvement practice that we put in place has to get paid for it. What has to pay for it? Either increased animal productivity or cost reductions on the other side of the equation. That's what will pay for putting new stock water, new fences, doing the reseeding. It has to come from added animal output or cost savings. So when we start thinking about what things cost, every job has materials and labor. If we think about stock water, and I guess I'm supposed to think about fertilizer, seed, and equipment first. If you're going to reseed a pasture, yeah, you probably are going to do something about fertility. You're going to have to buy seed to put out there. There'll be an equipment cost. This might be hiring it done. It might be using your own equipment. And if you're using your own equipment, there will be operating costs, fuel, labor, repair and maintenance, but there's also an equipment ownership cost. There is the overhead cost of owning equipment. In the U.S., you know, I've done tons of financial analyses for people at different scales of operation. Across a wide range of scales of operation, one of the most serious costs that we see people incur that actually are one of those things that sink the business is excessive capitalization in equipment. They own far too much equipment that the cows simply can't pay for because most guys love their toys. Some girls love their toys too, but mainly it's a guy thing. Tractors, seeders, drills, all that stuff. Guys like having that stuff around. Even if you only have 50 cows, you still have to have a tractor, a swather, a rake, a baler, ways to move that stuff around. And it makes making hay on a small ranch astronomically expensive because of too much investment in equipment. So look very hard at any investments in equipment. Okay, on the stock water, depending on whether or not you have a source, you might have to drill a new well, put a pump in it. Is that going to be a solar pump or a plug-in pump? We put out pipelines, tanks, geotextile, rocks, concrete. We just have all kinds of stuff that we can invest in the stock water system. I think I'll say something more about that a little bit later on. Fence. There's quality materials, and then there's trying to do everything as cheaply as possible. And in the long run, if you buy the lowest price energizer, the cheapest insulators, the cheapest posts, the cheapest poly wire, a low grade of high tensile wire, in the end it costs you more because ongoing maintenance just eats up all the cost savings. So I do emphasize, if you're going to build fence, if you're going to put in a stock water system, buy top rate materials, install them correctly, even on energizers and things like that. Even look at the instructions and make sure you're doing it right. And if you do, high quality materials installed properly. These are low maintenance systems. We still, in the cost benefit analyzer, we factor in a cost for added repair and maintenance because you now have more stuff on the ranch. But properly put in stock water systems, properly put in fence, should be 20 plus years of minimum maintenance. From the labor standpoint, we look at hired labor or doing it yourself. One of my favorite doing it yourself lines, I was in Ireland on a farm, and this guy had built a particular piece of equipment from scratch in the shop. And I can't even remember exactly what it was, but it was fairly impressive. And I said to him, "So what did it cost you to build that?" And he said, "Well, it didn't cost me nothing. I done it myself." We do have a problem in the farming and ranching industry that a lot of times we work for nothing. If we do it ourselves, there's still a cost to it because there's the alternative of what else could I have been doing if I wasn't working on this project. I approach farming and ranching from the standpoint, and when Dwayne was introducing me this morning, he said one of the things he liked about me is I approach this from a business standpoint. Now, I love the lifestyle. I love what I do, but I'm very business oriented, and you need to plug in at the top of every budget that you develop for a year or plan. You need to plug in your salary. That's the first thing that needs to be paid, is your salary. So before you start figuring the little cost of this and that and all that, on the top of the budget is your salary. This is what I need to be paid for being a farmer or rancher. Most people approach it from the standpoint of, if there's anything left at the bottom, that will be my salary. And for people who have nothing left on the bottom, that's why you go and get a town job, to subsidize the lifestyle of farming and ranching. If you put the salary in at top and do all your planning around that, farming and ranching becomes a lot more fun. Some people, as we think about management-intensive grazing cells and going out there and moving the stock every day, or, God forbid, 6 times a day or whatever, the assumption is, well, it's going to take more labor, it's going to take more labor. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on what you were doing before. So this is the question. By doing this, will it actually save me labor? Or do I have to get someone else to come in and move these cattle every day? Because quite frankly, I don't have time to go out and do it. So can I afford to add someone to come do this for me? And we're back to working for nothing versus paying someone else to do a particular job. Repair and maintenance, as I said, the more stuff you have on the place, the more repair and maintenance that you have. And back to that issue, use high quality materials, install them correctly, and we can keep annual repair and maintenance at a low level. I don't think, do any of you have elk in your neighborhood where you ranch? Anybody? Yeah, a few people. We have elk. When I came from Missouri to Idaho, we had white-tailed deer in Missouri, and every once in a while they'd run into the fence, but not very often, because they learned where the fences were, even the temporary fence. They learned to look for the blue post and the white line to know that, oh, there's a fence there tonight, let's jump over it. There's people in our valley who flat out will swear that you can never use electric fence where there are elk because they just always tear it up. Permanent fence, temporary fence, they're going to trash it. It took us 3 weeks to train the elk population to not bother our fences. And in the intervening 10 years since I trained the elk not to mess with my fences, you know what? I can count on one hand how many times I've had I'll take that back. I can count on one hand the number of times that I have had a temporary fence, a polybraid fence, knocked down by elk. I've had quite a bit of permanent high-tensile fence broken by the elk because what was originally installed on our place was cheap, low-grade, high-tensile wire. And elk can break. That what's sold as 170,000 psi, that's really about 110. Elk will break that. We put in, for all the additional fences we put in, we use 200,000 psi wire, and have never had elk break a fence. So when you're dealing with wildlife like that, all you have to do is figure out what the issues are with those critters, and you can fence them out. It actually took us a little longer to train the antelope than it did the elk, because antelope are cruising through the pastures at 50 miles an hour, and they don't see things quite as well. And to train the antelope, rather than using polywire for about 5 weeks, we used 1/2-inch tape. And so it took us 5 weeks to train the antelope. And again, in the intervening years, I've had fewer than 5 fences that were knocked down by antelope. We trained them. We altered their lifestyle to fit what our needs were. And life's good. The neighbors who say electric fence won't work still build 4- and 5-strand barbed wire fences, which, because it's not electrified, the elk, when 100 elk come charging off the mountain, on a headlong run, 4-strand barbed wire doesn't do anything to slow them down. And so the annual repair and maintenance every time that the elk go through on a fence like that is tremendous. Our fences, they jump over because they don't like getting shot. What we figure for repair and maintenance on high tensile fence systems is 2% annually. 2% of the original capital cost. On stock water systems, we figure 4%. So generally, I'm running about a 6% annual charge for repair and maintenance. Now we have to think about, okay, if I do this, what's it going to save me? Where am I going to spend less money because I'm going to graze more effectively? And there's just a list of things that might happen in your business. If you're not if you haven't bought any fertilizer, in 23 years, well, that's not a cost savings because you weren't spending it anyway. If, on the other hand, you were feeding hay for 200 days a year and you cut that down to 100 days a year or 40 days a year, that becomes a tremendous cost savings. All right, so if we figure what we expect the benefit to be, what the cost of installing the practice is going to be, the next thing we need to know is what is the economic value of us being able to harvest an extra animal unit a day off of our property. So over time, livestock prices change, right? So if we're doing a projection for 5 years or 10 years, what do we plug in for livestock prices? Do we take the highest price we've experienced in the last 5 years? I wouldn't do that, because you are setting yourself up for having a much lower return than what you project. So I like to look at a 5-year average. What have prices done over the last 5 years? What are the pundits saying they're going to do? And then take something less than the average price. Because if you can make it pay at less than what the average price for the last 5 years have been, it's probably going to work. The shorter the time that you make the payout period to recover your capital investment, the more accurately you're probably going to be able to estimate what the prices are going to be. This is one of the reasons I don't like doing a 10-year payout and projecting over 10 years this is what's going to happen, because I have absolutely no idea on earth what the price of beef is going to be 7 years from now. And there's nobody who does know what that's going to be. All right, this next one. What are you producing now? If your commodity cow-calf, well, these last couple of years, because of the record high calf prices, commodity cow-calf hasn't looked that bad. 5 years ago, where was it? 5 years from now, where will it be? I think it's going to be closer to what it was 5 years ago than what it is today. A couple of important concepts. Higher value products can pay for more improvements. And then there's the whole question of producing food versus producing commodities. The potential income per acre, if you are producing food that is being either directly sold to a consumer or is going to a wholesaler who directly sells it to a consumer, there's more value there than there is in commodities. Now this figure, or table here, in my experience in the U.S., I don't know if it holds in Canada, but if we want to look at the potential net profit per acre from grazing an acre of grassland, this is how they sort out. The highest net value that we produce in pasture is value-added dairy products. Grass-based dairy, making cheeses, butter, yogurts, things like that, that generates the highest, and then direct marketing those, that generates the highest net return per acre. It's followed by pasture-finished lamb, but that depends on where you are in the country. Some places, pasture-finished beef will be higher than lamb. But in areas that have a good demand for lamb, so, that's our, we don't call them yuppies anymore. I don't know what we call them. The people who are food adventurers. For us, it's the West Coast, the northeastern states, and Minneapolis. Those are the three best lamb markets in the country. And because of the biological efficiency that sheep have over cattle, you can produce more pounds of grass-fed lamb per acre and sell it for a higher price than grass-fed beef per acre. Commodity dairy products, done right on a grass-based dairy, and just selling to your regular dairy co-op, that can be very profitable as well. Then we have pasture-finished beef. We work our way down through here. And at the bottom of the list, over the last 5 to 10 years, commodity cow-calf has the lowest net return per acre. Right now, it's not too bad. This is how we calculate the expected return, gross margin return per animal unit day added. We have different classes of livestock, and I've got spreadsheets that have more different critters out than just that. But we take the weight of the animal, and that says utilization rate. That's actually target intake rate. 2.6% of body weight, 2.83%. So we get the daily forage consumption, the number of days we expect that class of livestock to be on the ranch. So for each class of livestock, each additional animal that we have on the place for the indicated period of time, this is how much forage they're going to eat. Now, the additional stocking for 780 pounds of forage, some people might say, well, that's a weird number. Anybody offhand know what 780 pounds of forage is? That is 1 AUM, 1 animal unit month. Standard animal unit is 26 pounds of forage per day. Multiply that times 30 is 780. So that's all that number is relating to, is this is how many additional AUM that animal is going to demand. We look at the gross return per animal, subtract out operating costs, and that gives us gross margin per animal. The gross margin is what is left over to pay the overheads. Your salary, your land payment, facility and equipment depreciation, and any other capital investments that you might make. One of the things that we're trying to accomplish with management-intensive grazing is generate more total animal unit days off of the same piece of property. So our land-based costs don't go overhead. We're not adding any additional land-based overheads because we already have the investment in that ranch, the facilities on it. We're covering, what we need to cover is the additional capital costs that we're incurring from this practice. From a labor standpoint, if you make this change in management and it does not cause you to have an increase in labor, we haven't added additional overheads there. So we don't have to pay them out of this additional gross margin that's coming in. Taxes, utilities, insurance, things like that probably aren't going to change. If they do change, it's a fairly minor increase. So the majority of this added gross margin, because we're running another animal on the place, can go towards paying the change in practice. So this is the added value per animal unit day after covering all of our operating costs, and we're pretty sure most of our overhead costs, because the animals we already have on the place, we're paying those overheads. So on the cow-calf, in this particular example, is $1.26. Yearling cattle was $1.57. Ewes and lambs, it was $3.22. So the people who are raising sheep, you understand why they do that, if they are effectively raising sheep. Now, you have neighbors who really don't do an effective job of raising their cattle. You have neighbors who also don't do an effective job of raising their sheep. But for the people who are doing a really good job with sheep, that's the kind of value per animal unit day they get. 2 to 3 times what the value of an animal unit day as a cow is. And then, this just goes through, takes all that information, and at the bottom of the line, it gives you an annualized return on investment. This particular one, 105, this was probably done for what I would call a medium-sized ranch, a stock water and fence development project that probably gave them the capability to rotate on a 1 to 3 day frequency. I'm saying that just based on the one-time per acre cost that I see at $105. 29% return on investment is not a bad deal. I don't know what the Canadian stock market is like. I don't know if you have something equivalent to our treasury bonds. There's a whole lot of stuff that I don't know about your economy, but I suspect that most of you wouldn't turn your nose up at a 29% return on investment. So again, we've gone through the tool now. and the stuff that feeds into it. Anybody who wants to get this cost-benefit analyzer, and I'm pretty sure it has an instruction sheet with it, either email me or I will work with Kathy to get it on the website, same as the presentations are going to be. All right, some other things we have to consider is obviously, what can you afford? If you're losing money on the ranch right now, you know what? You can't afford to do very much. Something else is going to have to change to put you into a position of having a positive cash flow. Either that, or you have to bring outside money into the ranch to subsidize this improvement that you're going to make. So I can get on my computer and I can punch in numbers, and for almost anyone in here, I'm pretty sure that I could show you that putting in a stock water and fence system in the long run would be profitable to you because of how it would change the production potential of the ranch and what your carrying capacity is. Question becomes, I should have put the pictures there. Question becomes is cash flow. How are you going to pay for that pipe that you bought from the supplier? How are you going to pay for those fence posts? Isn't that what it really is that stops us from doing a lot of things? Is how am I going to pay for that today? And so that's the big question. As I said, I can show that it's economically feasible and long-term profitability will increase if you do this. It becomes that question, how am I going to pay for it today? This brings us to the approach. You don't have to do everything at once. You can do these kind of projects in stages. You can stop that trencher or that backhoe at any point and end that water line there. Put in a couple of tanks. But have the plan that next year we're going to take it on over here and we're going to put in 3 more tanks over there. I don't like to make these things go on, for more than 5 years. If you're going to do it out in stages, I said, okay, let's look at getting this done in 3 or 4 years, as we can afford to do it. Now, each acre that you put the practice on, the year that you do it, should be generating the potential for additional carrying capacity and hence additional revenue flow. But you have to get the animals out there and start doing the management to get that increased production and that benefit. I have cost share opportunities here. Again, in Canada, I don't know what kind of programs you have, either with the government or conservation groups. In the U.S., through both state governments, federal government, on some of these kind of pasture improvement projects, whether it's reseeding a pasture, putting in stock water, putting in fence, there are cost share opportunities available. The government will pay you, or a conservation group might pay you part of the cost of implementing this. Is there stuff like that in Canada available? I see some heads nodding, yeah. If you don't mind working with the government, that money is your tax dollars at work. Feel free to try to get some of that money back to do work on your place. There's nothing really wrong with that. They would spend the majority of it on stupid things anyway, so try to get your share back out of that. And that doing it in stages and getting cost share support, that could certainly make it more feasible on a cash flow basis to get it done. Quality of the land that you're working with is obviously a factor. You get a bigger bang for your buck on higher quality land because you're starting from a higher base level of productivity and increasing productivity on land capable of producing, or that right now is producing 100 stock days per acre. The 20% increase is 20 more additional animal unit days. If we go back and think, okay, for the cow calf that had a value of $1.26 per AUD, well, that's about $27 per acre added annual income on that land that's producing right now at 100 animal unit days per acre. If you have land that it's sandy, it's shallow, it's got rocks in it, it's steep, and it only has a base productivity level of 30 stock days per acre, and a 20% increase is only 6 more animal unit days per acre. Well, that's only a little over $7 an acre that it's returning. And setting a tire tank costs exactly the same on a productive piece of land as what it does on a less productive piece of land. And so it takes more years of increased animal productivity to pay for that improvement on less productive land. The illustration of that, if our annual operating costs on a pasture are $50 an acre and it's capable of producing 2 tons to the acre, the base cost for you to produce 1 pound of dry matter is 1.25 cents. And so if we have a cow that's eating 30 pounds of forage per day, it's 37.5 cents a day to feed that cow. If we have land that will produce 4 tons to the acre, the base cost is just over ½ cent, so we're less than 20 cents a day to feed a cow there. And that doesn't sound like a big difference, but when you start taking 100 cows, 500 cows, 1,000 cows, those are big differences coming into play there. Management intensity, one of the things that we accomplish with management-intensive grazing is a higher seasonal utilization rate. We harvest more of the forage that we grow. So if we have a piece of land, that one that I said would produce 8,000 pounds per acre, typically with continuous grazing, season-long continuous grazing, you're going to harvest about 30 to 40% of the forage that actually grows in a year out there. I'm taking the upper end at 40%, so that would be 3,200 pounds per acre of harvested forage, which is 123 animal unit days per acre. If we put stock water and fence in place to where we can rotate twice a week, we would expect that utilization rate to go up to about 65%. So now, out of that 80,000 pounds that we grew, we're actually harvesting 5,200 pounds. That's 200 animal unit days per acre. The difference being what? 77. If we take that 77 added animal unit days, multiply it times the $1.26 gross margin value for a cow on our place, and suddenly we are looking at almost $100 per acre added income because we've changed the grazing management. In a lot of cases, that $100, 1 year's additional revenue flow will pay for the fence or the stock water out there. Might not pay for both. In some cases it will. In larger operations it would. So this is a big deal. The difference in seasonal utilization rate. Because you're already growing the forage. You have the land base, maybe you fertilized it, you've already done everything needed to grow 8,000 pounds of forage. But if you only harvest a third of it versus 2/3 of it, you basically double the cost of production for that animal from the pasture side of the equation. Higher stocking rates pay more bills. This is a custom grazing example. If we can run 1 steer to the acre and he's gaining 2 pounds a day for 150 days, and you're getting paid 80 cents a pound, the gross return's $240 an acre. If, by changing management, you can run a steer and a half to the acre and still maintain the 2 pounds a day gain for the same 150 days at 80 cents, we've just increased our gross revenue by 50%, $360 now. If, one of the basic relationships in grazing science for the last 100 years has been, as you increase stocking rate, individual performance will go down. And in a set stocking situation, that is absolutely and totally true. The more animals you put out in that big pasture and expect them all to be on that same pasture for 150 days, individual performance will go down. It's only by fine-tuning the grazing management each day, putting a fresh break of feed in front of them that's going to give them adequate intake, that you maintain a high rate of performance. So if we fail in our grazing management and we put the extra animals out there, and they only gain 1.6 pounds a day, same 150 days at 80 cents, $288. Yes, we have higher gross income than this one, but we have incurred far more cost by having the extra animals out there, doing some practice, but not managing that practice effectively. What type of livestock are we working with? We've already touched on this. Higher income potential justifies higher cost improvements. And again, basically the same summation of what are the most profitable critters. And then we have this question of, does it fit your program? And what does your program mean? Hopefully you have a set of goals for your business, for your ranch. Will making this change move you more quickly and directly towards your goals? That's a big question. Are you willing to make other necessary changes in management in order to make this work? Can it be accomplished with existing labor? And the single most important question of all, do you want to do it? Do the other people involved in your operation want to do it? If you don't really want to do it, and it's only from either financial pressure, peer pressure, whatever, if you are feeling pressured that you have to do this, the likelihood of failure goes up astronomically. If you look at this and say, this makes sense, I think I can do this, the odds of success go up exponentially. Attitude towards how you operate your farm and ranch is a tremendously powerful driving force. So I'm going to talk now about some specific practices, say a few more observations about it, and I'll throw out a range in cost on a lot of these things too. We almost always start with stock water development. Most ranches, most large ranches, are deficient in stock water availability. Shockingly, many smaller farms are also very deficient in good stock water opportunities. So we very often start here. What does it affect? Grazing distribution across the landscape more than any other single factor. When we get into large pastures, what determines where animals spend their time and how effectively they graze that pasture is location of water. If we only have 5 stock tanks on a 5,000 acre ranch, we spend a large amount of time around each one of those watering points. And the land adjacent to those watering points is going to get hammered. That makes it less productive. And each year that goes by, the zone of damage and reduced productivity tends to expand out from those points. And that gets us into the risk of overgrazing. This is, again, a typical starting point. If I were to come to your ranch and doing a consulting visit, and you would ask, okay, I would like to develop a stock water and fencing plan for this ranch. This is where I always start. This particular property is about 4,800 acres, and right now there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stock tanks on that 4,800 acres. It is just 2 pastures. There is a fence that splits it this way. So there's a front pasture and a back pasture. These circles are drawn at 1,200 meters, or roughly 3/4 of a mile, distant from those tanks. Most of the research that's been done looking at grazing distribution relative to animal travel distance in rangeland environments would show that somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 of a mile, there's enough change in forage utilization that it becomes economically feasible to put another stock tank in place. That's how big a deal water is. This idea that cows cheerfully walk 3 miles between water tanks and that life is wonderful for them, that's completely untrue. If you've been out, you see overgrazing close to the tanks. You get a mile away, pastures utilized a lot less. You approach the next tank, and you start getting within a half a mile of it. You get that overuse again. So generally across the landscape, we see short grazing, taller material left, and then short grazing as we approach the next post. So this is at 3/4 of a mile. This is not rugged, really rough rangeland. In rugged, rough country, that distance shortens up and we would be doing half-mile observations. But if you look at this, I've colored in the area, the amount of the range that is beyond 3/4 of a mile. So that's the area that we would really expect to see a substantial increase in grazing utilization if we put water out there. On this particular ranch, that's 27% of the land area is more than 3/4 of a mile from water. I did this with half-mile circles too, and it's about 48% of the range. So essentially half of the range is more than a half a mile from water. And this isn't particularly productive land right here. But we went through, did this project, and we added, I think, there's 1, 2, 3. I think we added 6 tanks out here. Well, how many circles do I have? I've got 11 circles, and there were 5 before. So yeah, we added 6 tanks here and reduced the amount of underserved area to less than 10%. And I'm not exactly sure why we didn't end up putting another tank down there, because that would have been a fairly easy because this is gravity, and we would have to pump water here. That's why we didn't do it there. But this is the approach we take. We identify how much of the land is likely to benefit from having additional stock tanks in, which, by the way, in hot, humid country like Missouri, 600 to 800 feet was the distance at which this change in grazing distribution occurred in the hot, humid part of the summer. So in hot country, we use a different criteria than what we use in rangeland. Here, I would probably be looking at about that half mile distance. Subdivision fencing. Again, we use it to control grazing distribution across the landscape, the duration of time stock in a specific area, reducing the risk of overgrazing. And here's where we bring in, if you are going to reseed a pasture, and maybe it's not the entire pasture, maybe you have a 100-acre field here, and there's 40 acres, you say, man, I got to do something with that. And if you put a new seeding on 40 acres of that and leave it unfenced, what's going to happen to that 40 acres? It's going to get hammered, because being a new growth, young tender, all that, greater diversity in it, that's probably where the animals are going to prefer to graze rather than the remaining 60 acres. As soon as you put a fence in place and separate that 40 acres that you seeded from the other 60 acres, you have changed your opportunity to control the life expectancy of that new seed. And so the fence is very powerful to change, rather than having to seed a new pasture every 5 years, to make it be 25 years or even just once in your lifetime. That piece of fence makes a huge difference. And it's by further subdividing that we increase stock density and derive the benefits I was talking about this morning. For us, when I say we're going to put up a permanent fence in your pasture, this is what I'm talking about. 2 strands of electrified high tensile wire on solid end posts with line posts. The wildlife can't knock the wire off. To me, that's a permanent fence. We don't have to do 4 or 5 strand barbed wire fences. If we're doing sheep, this would be a 3-wire fence rather than a 2-wire fence. And we would pull the posts, the line posts, a little closer together. But that's about the only change that we made. Now, one of the projects I did last year, real interesting one, was on a bison range. And they had, the type of division fence they had been putting in was 7-strand barbed wire, because that's what it takes to contain, bison has been their experience. We did the cost-benefit analysis of splitting their place up for about a 3 to 5 day rotation frequency, and it was a money loser when we did it based on their conventional barbed wire fencing. We can configure an electric fence in what we call bipolar, and it's Mr. Lamb, I guess that's his name, from the Stay Fix, the Speed Right, Lamb Acres. Is he still here?
It's outside.
He's outside, okay. If you look at those energizers that he had, everything from the 6,000 up to the, I think it's 120,000, or maybe that's a 12, well, it's up to the 63 joule unit. Those energizers can be configured as what we call a bipolar fence. And on that, it has a ground terminal, a yellow half-power terminal, and a red full-power terminal. If you hook your ground rod to the yellow terminal, it tells the energizer to split that electrical pulse into positive and negative polarity. And then you put one wire to the green ground terminal, one to the red wire, and what you end up with is this wire, being positive polarity, this one being negative polarity. What does that mean? That means a cow could stand on a sheet of porcelain and be perfectly insulated from the soil, but she would still get a 10,000 volt arc if she touched both of those wires simultaneously. And so on bipolar, we put them a little closer together. But you could have a perfectly insulated animal, they touch the fence, and they'll still get a 10,000 volt shock. It's the most effective fence that we can put out in the desert, on frozen ground, anything like that. Speed Right and Stay Fix energizers have the capacity to do that. I think Gallagher might have an energizer that does that now. And so we took this bison fence, configured it 3-wire bipolar, and so the cost ends up being only about 25% of the cost of a barbed wire fence, and suddenly the project showed, a 20-something% return on investment, whereas it was a money loser done with conventional fence. So if you're not already using modern electric fencing, I strongly encourage you to move that direction, but make sure you buy quality materials and install them correctly. An incorrectly installed bipolar fence would be an ongoing daily nightmare. And so you have to put it in right. We make additional subdivisions within this framework of portable fence or a permanent fence using portable fence, step-in posts, polywire reels. So like our big pivot, our 300-acre pivot has 3 fences on it. The outside perimeter, the inside circle, and then one feeder line that connects the 2 of them. Everything else for our daily move, we create with a temporary fence on a daily basis. There was one year I was able to stockpile that entire 300-acre pivot, and I grazed it off in 102 one-day moves. That's what you can do with temporary fence. You can take a permanent framework and make it very easy to turn it into daily moves. All right, raising base fertility from low to medium. What will that do? It'll help you maintain legumes in the pasture, increase forage production, increase forage quality, and also increase water use efficiency. Because you could have all the water in the world, and if your soils are mineral deficient, you won't get optimum productivity out of them. So if you take care of that base fertility, each inch of water that falls is going to give you a bigger return. This is, again, work we did in Missouri, looking, and this soil test is in pounds of P per acre. You do parts per million up here. The response curve is going to look exactly the same, just different numbers. But to go from a soil test value of phosphorus that gives us 60% potential pasture production to go up to 90% of the potential takes about 160 pounds of P2O5 applied. To go from medium fertility to high fertility, it takes that same 160-pound application would only give us an 11% increase in production rather than 50%. So the lower down that you are on this response curve for phosphorus, for sulfur, for boron, the bigger bang you will get for a dollar invested in base fertility. I'm assuming these are fairly high pH soils through here. Is that right? 7 or better? Okay. I don't think liming is something that you would do here, but the liming response is the same way. Interseeding legumes, that will almost always pay with any class of livestock if you do it effectively. The work that's going on at the center here with the milk vetch, the alfalfa seedings, I applaud that absolutely. What does it do? It can eliminate the need for nitrogen fertilization. If you haven't been putting on nitrogen fertilizer, well, now you're going to get a nitrogen fertilizer from the legumes in there. It'll increase for its production, for its quality, and hence individual animal performance. Those are what I recommend for, if you're interseeding clovers, recommendation in there. Get it off the website later. Okay, then we come to the last one here, that is complete renovation. Tearing up what is there and doing something different. First and foremost, why is that pasture in the shape that it needs to be renovated? If it's a product of your management, I don't know how many times I've said this tonight, you've got to change your management first before there's any value in receiving that pasture. And I think I also already said, to me, seeding a pasture is something you do once in your lifetime. If you take care of it with good grazing management, it'll be out there for as long as you're alive. Other comments, seed only adapted species. Seed species that fit with your management and goals. Most wonder grasses really aren't. And diversity is good for grazing. The more species diversity that we can put into the pasture, the more productive it's going to be. Let's get that one. The more productive it's going to be, the better mineral nutrition the animals are going to have. And when you improve the animal nutrition or the mineral nutrition of animals, it stimulates their immune system, and your animals don't get sick near as often. They're just healthier, better balanced individuals. So I hadn't put it up after the first talk this morning. My contact information is there. Several people have asked me if I brought books to sell. No, I did not, because over the last few years it has become an increasing hassle for me to carry those over the border to bring to a deal like this. So I didn't bring them. If you visit our website, there's a downloadable order form, and I have to say, I'm sorry, my Canadian friends, but we have to charge you $5 more postage than what we do our American customers, just because of the additional cost of getting them up here. But if you're interested in either of my books, go to our website and do it. So, questions, comments, discussion before we say goodnight? Yes, sir.